Jeff was supposed to come the last September, I believe, or in the past September, and had an unexpected conflict. So we're really happy to have you here, Jeff. Jeff was in the Memorial Day Parade, so I met him then. And then he's a retired naval aviator who deployed to Kabul, Afghanistan in 2012. 2013 as a mobilized naval reservist. He's going to be discussing along with slides the Afghanistan border operations and challenges, and cover the history of Afghanistan, their border history, issues with their border, and what we did at ISAF as part of their mission. He now works at Sikorsky Aircraft and has lived in Cheshire since 2003. Jeff, we're happy to have you. I don't know if we've really had anyone talking about Afghanistan. I think we've had Iraq, but everybody's been interested in this discussion, so we're happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Can you get the lights, Leslie? Can those lights go down? So for this presentation, I am open to all comments. Anybody, questions, concerns as we go along? Just put your hand up, right? It'll work well if it's a discussion. As Leslie said, I am a town resident. I've been here now, 14 years. So happy to talk to the group. Happy to discuss my experiences. I am a Navy helicopter pilot by trade. So I was active duty, got out of active duty in 2003, joined the reserves, moved to Cheshire, started working for Sikorsky. And about 18 months before my retirement, my Uncle Sam said, I got a vacation for you. Time to go to Kabul. So I don't know if any of you grew up reading Superman comics, but the best way to describe Afghanistan is it is Bizarro World. So Superman has someone who looks like Superman, but everything's opposite, everything's unusual, everything's different. Afghanistan is much that way, and we'll talk about how it is and why, and really the challenges that we faced there, and I think we will continue to face going forward. I've riddled this presentation with pictures that I took myself. I didn't take this one, but I thought it was a good opening shot to kind of let you know a couple of things you're dealing with right off the bat in Afghanistan. First off is fairly low tech, right? That's a mortar. Second off is pretty homemade, sandbag construction type dealings, right? It's pretty low rent. And the other one you should take away from anything in Afghanistan is incredibly rough. The terrain is incredibly rough. Nothing is flat. Nothing in the areas that we're going to talk about are really easy to deal with. Yes?
Can I make a suggestion?
Go ahead.
In a short paragraph, why did we get involved in a war? What was the movements and so on? Because usually not everyone reads the papers and knows.
Can I work to that answer?
Yes.
Playing a good straight man. I'm gonna work towards that. I appreciate it. All right. So first off, I'm going to start with where is Afghanistan, because I Googled it, right? When I got orders, I was like, really, where is it? Okay? So I had done 2 deployments on aircraft carriers flying helicopters to the Persian Gulf, right? More than intimate with doing silly circles in the sea there watching Saddam Hussein, okay? However, Afghanistan is located farther to the east and surrounded by Pakistan and Iran, and all of these were former Soviet Union stands, we call them, because they all end in stan, right? So all of the little countries, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, they all used to be part of the Soviet Union, right? That's going to be important later. And China, yes, there is an itty-bitty little teeny border between Afghanistan and China, and I'll explain to you why in a minute. But the one that matters the most, and what we'll talk about the most, we'll talk generally about some of these borders, but the one that is the most important is the border with Pakistan. And why is that? Because the border with Pakistan and Afghanistan is where all the problems occur, okay? So Ethnically, Afghanistan is a pretty diverse place. It's as diverse as the United States is ethnically. However, those ethnicities kind of have homelands. They kind of have areas where they live, right? And if you look at this red line that is the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, it divides the Pashtuns' homelands in half. Do you think any of the Pashtuns would ever divide themselves in half? No. The Brits did it. And we'll talk about who did it specifically coming up. But this really is the core of the problem, is Afghan people don't think of themselves as Afghans, right? They don't. They think of themselves as their ethnicity. So, this causes a series of problems when two states want to divide folks who want to go travel between each other. All right? Pakistan also is relatively new on the scene, right? 1948. Pakistan is a new country as well. So they're kind of stuck in the middle. They worry a lot more about India, but they have a lot of problems with the Afghan border as well, and we'll talk about that. That area called the FATA, does anybody know FATA? The Federally Administrated Tribal Area. That is a 4-letter acronym for the Wild West. That means Pakistan doesn't have the reach of law in that area. So Pakistan admits that they can't do what Pakistan wants to do in that area. And so instead what they do is they let the tribes run it. Okay? There's no other way to describe it for Americans than it's the Wild West. Anything goes. Okay? So that kind of sets the stage for a few, yes sir?
You say FATA is essentially lawless, but it must have its own set of laws or moral codes which they follow internally. True or false?
They do, but you'll have to understand that that area people don't answer to anybody. They do have a code, right?
But
It's
I'm
more on
wondering
personal
whether
behavior.
The Sharia law
Correct.
apply in there?
Yes, in all of Afghanistan. As a matter of fact, the Sharia law is part of the problem with, the way women dress and a lot of the way people interact with each other, right? The short Cliff Notes version of Sharia law is, I dress the woman up in a veil so that I don't have to take vengeance on you offending me, right? Because if you are attracted to my wife, now I have to avenge her honor by putting violence on you. So I'm going to stop that by you not being able to look at her, right? So it's really Sharia law is a strange way for folks to deal with each other, but it is the custom there. Some of the other things, and I want to point some of these out, when I talked about it being really bizarre, okay? Afghanistan is the only country in the world in the 4.5 time zone. They're 30 minutes off of everybody else. Nobody has the same time zone. They're on their own time. They're also on their own calendar, right? So this is a conversion between today's years and their years. Let's see, it's 1382 there, okay? They have a lot of different languages, very diverse. This is a challenge amongst folks to talk to each other, right? In the United States, we've got English and Spanish, right? I say 99.9% of Americans can speak one of those two languages. That is definitely not the case in Afghanistan, right? And one part, Americans and Westerners, and probably one of the biggest challenges for anybody who is entering Afghanistan to make a change, is Americans and Westerners think things are quick. They have a sense of time that is very compressed. In the United States military, we think in terms of our tour. We think in terms of a year. Afghans think in terms of hundreds of years. If you've ever spoken, Chinese have this kind of view of the world too. Their personal life and their personal time in Afghanistan is really kind of not that important. They have a much longer horizon. We have a much shorter horizon. We want to get things done. They particularly don't drive to that goal because eventually it will get done, right? And the famous thing is inshallah. That's their famous term, and that's if God wills it. Right? Can we get this done? Inshallah. Well, if God wills it, we'll get it done. That's a different view of time. That's a different view of the way we think versus the way they think. And basically, time and time again, we can't understand that. Right? We want to move fast. We have a timetable. We have a schedule. You don't understand. This is a big battle plan. We know how we're doing this. We're going to we're going to make all these things happen. And when you miss the first one because nobody's cooperating, it slows the whole timeline down, right? It is not a surprise to anybody who's been in Afghanistan why the Russians took 10 years, got frustrated and left, and why the Americans have now been there 15 years, and you're like still in the same place when you started, right? It's not a surprise. So let's talk about that actual border, right? That's him. That's Mr. Duran. Mr. Duran drew this red line across a map in 1893. And he drew it in particular because of Great Britain's interest in India at the time, because Pakistan was still part of India. And he wanted a buffer between the Great Britain area and the Russians. So they created a landlocked country called Afghanistan. Okay? It cuts the Pashtun area in half. The Baluchistan area, which is down here, which is the area that used to give the Pashtuns access to water, was cut off as well, left it landlocked, but it served its number one purpose. It created a buffer country between the Great Britain's interest and the Russian interests. For that, it was successful. The Duran Line today is a border like you can't imagine. Okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Today, in America, if you drive to Canada, the Canadians and the Americans agree where that line is. Right? There's no doubt. We don't have a doubt in the world where that line is. Both countries understand that line. Both countries respect that line. And if you step over that line, you're in Canada. And if you step back, you're in the United States. And we understand that. And we've never had a problem with that. Right? The Canadian border is the largest undefended border, in the world. Right? Straight line. It's a great concept. Everybody agrees. However, the Duran Line's not like that. Okay? First off, it's not recognized by either country. Start there. Neither side says that's the border. Mr. Duran drew it. And he said he got agreement from the Afghans back in the 1890s that's the border. They agreed. So he because at the time it was a colony of Britain, right, from India. He says, no, we were the British. We agreed that that's where the line was. And the people who ran Afghanistan and area at that time agreed that that's the border. And in the end, they said neither side now recognizes it. Pakistan, which is now an offshoot of India, says, no, I don't care. And Afghans, who now have had 6 governments since, say, no, we don't recognize it either. Okay? So let me tell you a little bit about what also you're dealing with as a complicating factor here. Most of you, all of you, were born before 1964?
Yeah.
You have seen every form of government if you're your age in Afghanistan. You can't go to a civics class and find a type of government that you haven't lived through if you're your age in Afghanistan. You've had a king, you've had Russians, you've had communists, you've had the Taliban, you've had everything. So and they're a very age-focused society. If you're a man of your age, you were held in very high esteem in Afghanistan. That is their culture, right? But keep in mind, when you sit there and you sit across the table from a gentleman who's your age, you're just the latest on the list, right? And they've lived through all those other things. And what a lot of people don't understand is the Taliban may have lasted 5 years and been terrible 5 years in Afghanistan history. Terribly violent, right? But the Russians weren't any better, right? The Russians who were there cut down virtually every tree in Kabul. Do people know back in the 50s and 60s, people went to Kabul? It was supposed to be a metro area. It was supposed to be a cutting edge. It was like a spot people wanted to go to. American petroleum companies were going there. We're trying to get mining going in the 50s, right? The Russians came and cut down every tree because they didn't want anybody to hide on the way to attack any facility they had. So there's no trees, basically, right? So it's pretty impressive to realize that the folks that you're dealing with to try to make change have lived through these major changes in their life. And so that focuses their view of the world. You are the Johnny-come-lately as an American, right? Now we do it also a little different, and that's part about ISAF that we'll talk about, is the U.S. didn't go in alone, right? ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, which existed until the end of major combat operations in 2014, was a NATO mission. It was run by NATO. Okay, so we had a number of countries there. All right? So I want to talk about, we talked about the border not being recognized. So between Afghanistan and Pakistan, all three of these scenarios exist. Okay? The one in the middle is the one that we would actually recognize the most as Americans. And that would be that Afghanistan and Pakistan, or the United States and Canada, have a line in the middle. The only problem is they don't agree that that's the line. Okay, there is a line. They know where that line is. The line's actually marked with little white pillars, right? We'll show you a picture of what the pillars look like. That just doesn't, they don't recognize it, though. I know there's a pillar there, but it's not the line. But the good news is the Afghan and the Pakistan outposts are on opposite sides of the line. That's pretty good, right? This one's actually pretty harmless too and exists in a number of places along the border. And that is the Afghans claim up to a certain spot and the Paks claim up to a certain spot and nobody claims the middle. If you've seen this land, you wouldn't want to claim it either. You can't do anything with it. I should stress that a lot. You can't do anything with this land. This is not a mine. This is not fertile fields. This is rocks on a hill, right? But there are no man land areas. This is the one that causes all the problem. And this is the one that exists more than you think, right? And that is the Afghans' claim into what Pakistan thinks is their area, and Pakistan claims it into what Afghanistan thinks is their area. And to make it even more complicated, they build border posts on either side of each other. So you will actually have Afghanistan border posts that are to the east of the Pakistan ones. So you can be in an Afghan border post and be surrounded on all sides by Pakistan border posts. That's standard in the disputed areas. Okay? Here's the third variable, though. In all of these areas, there are not just Afghan army and Pakistan army. There are insurgents on both sides of the border trying to overthrow the respective governments. Okay? So Afghanistan has insurgents that are trying to overthrow the Pakistan government, and the Pakistan side has insurgents that are trying to overthrow the Afghan government. And so what they do is they march in the middle of that and shoot around. And watch the Pakistan and the Afghanistan side shoot at each other. So one of the best things we can do with our technology is prove to them when that happens that didn't come from a border post. That's probably our best contribution towards keeping this border calm. Is we can very quickly with technology tell when there's a round fired where that round came from. And when you know where that round came from, you can quickly triangulate it and call both sides and say, no, that's an insurgent shooting at you guys. That's not one of the border posts shooting a border post. Because what happens when a border post shoots a border post? It becomes an international incident, right? Now both governments get involved. An escalation starts. And I'll run through a scenario, the one that happened when I was there, okay? So, and I will be crystal clear, the other problem with this issue is because they have such great memories and they have such a long view of time, they're all guilty in the past, okay? Every scenario you can imagine has happened on this border. And they all remember them. They've been on the border for years. So some of them sit over there in the Pakistan border and they're like just waiting to shoot an Afghan. Like, you gotta be kidding me. I hate those guys. I'm gonna shoot them today. And they're waiting. And sometimes the guy just pulls the trigger. They're legitimate no harm, no foul. The guy just, boom, shoots around. And that starts a skirmish, right? A lot of them don't appear to be very organized. Some of them may just be a guy's leaning on a weapon and he shoots around. I mean, some of them are very unorganized. But it's a problem that has no easy solution. Okay? I want to show you what border defenses kind of look like too. So, standard Humvee, US of course, right? 50 cal. Put a couple sandbags, put a wall around it, that's good. Standard technical, Toyota truck, also with a smaller, probably an M240 on it. And then this is just a border police truck, so it's essentially unarmed. This is the sort of terrain I'm talking about that's between Pakistan and Afghanistan, right? It's a very porous border. People walk back and forth it all the time. We'll show you some pictures of what the border crossings look like, right? This is an Afghan border post that's actually made like a stucco, if you will, like a mud, right? With firing holes out of it, okay? And these all dot the landscape. So that's the sort of thing that these soldiers are standing in, waiting for the next skirmish to go off. And this is one that's practically plywood. I mean, it's really built out of plywood. But there's armed guys in there waiting, right? This is actually the radio or the telephone line goes into it. I took that picture on the bottom left there.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
What is expected that might happen if we were not there at all? In other words, with all of these objectives that seem to be intermeshed
Yes.
and have such a long history behind them, what are we expecting really to accomplish
Yeah.
by being in the middle of all this?
So that's very good. So the NATO mission in Afghanistan, with the United States as a part of, the United States runs. The United States puts a four-star general in charge of it, right? So General Dunford and General Allen were the two 4-stars when I was there. The purpose of them is to keep the Taliban out of power. The Taliban was kicked out in 2001. We did a major invasion, kicked them out. They're now called an insurgency because they're no longer in power. So the Karzai government, which has now gone through succession leadership, the purpose of the mission in NATO is to keep the Taliban away and to keep that government.
The main purpose of that is so that the Taliban will not increase its capability.
Yeah, Taliban's guilty of a number of things. I mean, obviously one of them is training and exporting terrorism, right? But they were also incredibly oppressive to the actual Afghan population, right? The part Americans don't want to hear is because they do have such a long view on life. Many of the people in Afghanistan continue to pay the Taliban members to not attack them. One of the things the Taliban makes their most money on today is extortion, saying you pay me and I won't blow up your stuff, right? So they don't extort, or they don't try to fight Americans as much as you would think. They try to gain resources and money and power through pushing the Afghan population around. They still do that. There's a shadow government that the Taliban runs in Afghanistan. All of the areas still have Taliban leaders. They have Taliban, we know who they are, right? And we go out and thump them every night, right? Anybody we can find, right? The ISAF missions was taken care of. However, the reality is like a cell phone tower. They'll go to the company that owns a cell phone tower and says, hey, you want that cell phone tower to stay up? Cost you $50 a day. Otherwise it gets blown up next week, right? And they'll go blow it up. So they make money, right? So they have resources to train folks, right? And they train folks. Now keep in mind, many of the people who live in this area are extremely poor, right? And if the Taliban is offering resources, martyrdom, life in heaven with, you know, great life, afterlife, there are many people who sign up. That's a good option for them. So they do, they take it. So there's always a continual turnover of those folks in the insurgency. You know, some people attack, they get killed, there's a few more who get recruited, and it just keeps kind of going. It's very hard to squash completely, right? But you want to keep the Taliban out of power, because when the Taliban was in power, it was incredibly bad for the population, both in terms of the strictness of law and the freedoms people could have and freedom of travel, but also the just abuses of civil rights that went on with those folks. So it's very,
Jeff?
yes.
So, with that being said, you know, the people, whether they're poor or not, you would think because of the extortion and what they do to them, that they would start, that would be something that would bond them together to fight against them when they have others that are gonna help them with that, but that
But they
doesn't
don't.
seem to happen.
They don't,
I know
no,
my
'cause
nephew
you're-
in Afghanistan had.
Because you're small groups, you're isolated, you're untrained, you're unarmed
and
yourself.
They don't speak the same languages.
You're by yourself in that little village down there in the valley. It's
Yeah.
you know, the best description I ever heard is Taliban's a bunch of thugs. That's literally what they are. They'll come to the village and they'll push people around and, you know, you owe us money or things are going to get real bad for you here. You know, kind of sounds like mafioso, doesn't it? It's kind of that way.
So when we first got involved in Afghanistan, the so-called Northern Alliance teamed up with us to clean out the Taliban. What happened to them? Why
So
not?
the Northern Alliance people, the leaders of the Northern Alliance, are essentially the leaders of Afghanistan. They become civilian leaders of Afghanistan. That's where Karzai, those folks fought. All those guys inherited.
So they've become so corrupt that they decided not to try to wipe out the Taliban?
Well, they're always trying to wipe it out. It's just it's hard to focus unless you've been there to realize Kabul is a city of 3 million people. Okay, it's the size of Chicago. In the size of Chicago, you've got maybe a couple hundred people who are bad guys.
What?
Bad guys, Taliban. Go find them. Go find a couple hundred out of 3 million. You know, constantly moving, constantly changing, constantly recruiting, moving in and out. It's really crazy to try to find those folks, and they're not wearing uniforms. They're not fighting fair, right? This is straight up terrorist warfare that they do, right? So this is a little dated. It was from '09. They didn't have any from the time I was there, but this gives you a good idea of how ISAF views the world, right? So Kabul is here, and then the provinces are divided up. So the north, right? You've got the west, you've got the southwest, and this is the east. And this is the border of Pakistan. And I'll show you a chart coming up next. There is a big reason that the United States Army and the United States Marine Corps run southwest and east. It's because southwest and east is where all the fighting is, right? Afghanistan doesn't really have a problem with their border with Iran. This is a very quiet part. And the northern part, like you said, was the Northern Alliance, has been long been the anti-Taliban stronghold, right? So this area of the country is pretty quiet, right? So in and around the capital, and then down here in, we call it PKP, and Patika Coast and Patika and Patika, right? Say those fast 3 times, right? Those are the hottest provinces in Afghanistan. And this is how you know. So, extreme risks. Kandahar was the site of the Taliban last stand building. That's where they actually made their last stand and got kicked out as government, right? But these areas are where the insurgency lives. It's very calm up on the other 2 sides. So in Afghanistan, under ISAF, the U.S. ran those 2 hottest areas. We had the most presence, we had the best trained troops, and frankly, we weren't afraid to fight, right? So what we're going to talk about, this is some of the major crossings, okay? So Spin Boldak is the name of the town. West Shaman is sometimes what it's called because it's west of Shaman, right? But Spin Boldak is a major crossing. Gulam Khan is a major crossing, and the biggest is Torkham Gate. And we'll talk about Torkham coming up. The reason I point out those three are where the major roads cross, and this road's not really well defined on that map, but that road's there now. And then these are the major roads going between Pakistan and Afghanistan. They're like interstates, for lack of a better term, and I'll show you some of the pictures I took. The good part when I was in Afghanistan is I got to go visit these places, right? So you get to see what, and I'll show you here in the pictures of what they look like. Gulam Khan is the smallest of the three. Borders close and open all the time, and when they close, they just back up like crazy like this. Gulam Khan is the smallest and the quietest of the three. This is actually, the border area is actually a dead man zone. Okay? So there's the no man's land in the middle. So that actually makes this a very calm crossing. You actually leave Pakistan, you drive for quite a ways, and then you become into Afghanistan. So the two checkpoints are quite a ways apart. Okay? So this is the southernmost one I was talking about, Spin Boldak or West Shaman. One of the things someone asked about how we make a difference in Afghanistan. So what we did on our mission there was train the Afghan border police how to run a border checkpoint. Okay? The U.S. Embassy had a border management task force with Customs and Border agents, folks that ran the checkpoint at El Paso, right? Came to Afghanistan to teach the Afghan border police how to run a checkpoint, how to run a scanner, how to scan trucks, how to scan people, how to recognize contraband, how to seize contraband, okay? And build facilities. So NATO built a bunch of the facilities. So this is a police station that was built by NATO. And you see all these walls that are putting in. They're going to put more buildings in this area. And that's the gate. Now, if you've ever been in this area, they love gates. Gates are great things. Until we'll get to this border skirmish and people don't like gates anymore. Right? But they build these big gates so that you know where the border is. Right? It's actually hilariously called the Friendship Gate. Right? Not a lot of friendship going on between the two, but that's what they call it. And this is also where you shut the border off. And they shut the border off all the time. Boom. They can shut it down multiple times a day. Another concept we don't understand, right? You want to go to Canada, you go today, have a nice trip, right? You want to go to Mexico, go today, have a nice trip. And that's not the case in Afghanistan, routinely. So this is the road in Afghanistan, goes in and goes into Pakistan, okay? So I spent a lot of time at Torkham Gate. Torkham Gate was the biggest one. This is me. And someone talked about corruption. That's the most corrupt Afghan national or border police lieutenant in the world, right there. So something else we got to talk about, right? There are very few good-paying jobs, right? If you're in the government of Afghanistan and you want to have a good job, chances are you got to buy it. And the way you buy it is you have a family member or a tribesman or somebody of your ethnicity in a place of power in the government who gives you that position under one pretext. And that is every month you come by with a little bit of cash. And so you actually buy your position and you take out basically a loan and you have to pay the guy who gave you the position over the course of several years. You pay him back. But hold on, you say. A Afghan border police lieutenant can't make that much money, right? So you don't make that much money. How do you make the money? You use the scanner that you were just given, and you tell people who are smuggling in the country, you can go around the scanner for $500, or I can put you through the scanner and you can go to jail, and you make $500. Repeat, and before you know it, you can pay for your job. You might have not a lot of jobs. This is actually a solid option for a lot of people to do. Okay? And so you provide for your family where you couldn't before, right? And in the end, you're just turning your cheek the other way. That's a problem. We're not used to that as Americans. This is normal way of life for them, right? We're not used to that. So this is the Torkham checkpoint. This is what the counter looks like. These are Afghan border police folks, and they're checking people as they come by, right? We stop by as Americans every now and then. When we show up with the whole force, right? That's who this is. This is good. This is the Army Air Force Forum. Some hard-charging 101st soldiers sitting there being protection for everybody else who's there, right? And we go out and check to make sure they're doing the right thing, make sure they're actually doing the procedures they're supposed to be doing, Customs and Border Protection, checking to make sure the machines are working and all that. So all of that is done while you're still watching trucks go by like this. And some of the photos you've seen of that entire truck filled with shotguns. You know, that entire truck and they're just humans in the back. They're insurgent fighters in the back of those. And even illicit drugs. They have a very anti-drug culture, very severe penalties for drugs, but they still grow poppy like crazy because it's a great cash crop, right? So you have to think of all of those things when you're there. You have no idea what any of these things are. That could also, be somebody who wants to attack you. So this is Torkham Gate. This is this building here. Well, it was in the previous picture. So the road goes down the middle. Hard to see it in this photo. And then the people walk around. So there's a personnel scanner, and then this is the big scanner for trucks. So you try to make sure they're doing this every day. These are the people walking across the border. Right? This is what you find when you know something's amiss. Oh, that truck just broke down there. Sorry, Americans just showed up. That truck broke down. We can't run it through the scanner right now. We got to get that truck fixed. It can't move. You know why that truck broke down? They pulled that hood up as soon as they saw us roll into town, right? Because I can guarantee you there's something bad in that truck. You just don't know what it is, and you're not authorized to go open it up.
Why not?
Right? Because that's not the mission of ISIN, right? Your mission isn't in there opening random commercial vehicles, right? You're there to train them to do their job. So, very interesting the way it rolls. There's probably 20,000 people at Torkham Gate walk across the border every day. So it's a very high traffic area. I put this picture in here because if you look really carefully, you can see the white markers. And we had reports that they would actually go out there and move the white marker. Would you fight for that? I mean, look at that land. I mean, that is right by Torkham Gate. That's the border.
Why are those people crossing the border?
Usually because all situations. They live in Pakistan, work in Afghanistan, vice versa, visiting family, have some reason to cross the border. They're in shipping. They run companies that run freight trucks. So there's every reason to cross the border that you or I would have a reason to cross the border. Right? Yes, sir.
Jeff, aside from the military aspect of keeping the Taliban in check and reducing hostilities, what does America have to gain in Afghanistan? Is it a market for anything? Is it a source of raw materials for us?
No, actually, we don't really get much mining or minerals out of Afghanistan or money. We definitely don't want the poppy, right? What we get is supposedly less terrorism across the world, because there was no doubt before 2001 that this was a hotbed of training. That there's many training camps in Afghanistan to train terrorists, right? A terrorist can't actually do his job when he walks off the street, right? A terrorist has to sit with a bomb maker and learn how to make bombs, and they have to understand how to attack a fixed facility, right? And they train to do that. They get AK-47s and they have practice camps with dummy walls, and they practice storming the wall. They actually practice before they come do the event, right? So they train, and there was no kidding, lots of training camps in Afghanistan. The Taliban encouraged it, right? So that's probably the biggest thing I would say since 2001 that America and the world has gotten out of the U.S. and UN and NATO involvement in Afghanistan, was that part has gone away, right? I should say the Taliban is who we point to because the Taliban who was in government. But the Taliban was not the only problem even when they were running the country, right? So there's a network called the Haqqani Network on the border too. And they are the same thing. They're a different type of insurgent. They don't necessarily get along with the Taliban all the time. There's an Afghan Taliban, there's a Pakistan Taliban. They don't necessarily get along all the time, ideologically, right? They may cooperate sometimes when it's in their interest, and sometimes they don't cooperate with each other. So it's incredibly complicated. There's many issues with.
But just to conclude, I understand you to be saying there's no oil there that America seeks. There's no copper or bauxite or metal ores or raw materials we're seeking.
Generally speaking, I don't think America gets into conflicts for what I'll call resources, right? I mean, we're not doing it for oil or any of that stuff. No, very little. I mean, Afghan has very little give, right? We should also point out Afghanistan's government today can't support its own army and its own police forces without the great influx of foreign money. So all of us countries giving money to Afghanistan is what allowing them to pay to maintain the army they have to fight the insurgency, to maintain the border police to fight the insurgency, all of those things. So they need foreign money because they don't have their own industry. There is mining in Afghanistan, there are minerals in Afghanistan, it's just not like we think. It's not a cash cow, right? It's not the diamond mines of South Africa that makes millions and millions and millions and millions, right? So I was also going to show you in Turkum, this is a staging, this was taken from a distance. These are all trucks in Afghanistan waiting to go to Pakistan because they closed the border and they just stack up there. And it may be days and the drivers just sleep in their trucks waiting for the border to reopen, right? Down here, this is all U.S. military equipment on flatbeds. You see it? Some of it's put in shrouds, but you can see all the tan vehicles and trucks and stuff. Because what we were doing in 13 is preparing to get out in 14. So as we were closing bases and getting the number of troops down, we'd have to ship this stuff out. And the only way to ship it out is to drive it to Pakistan and get it out on a ship because Afghanistan's landlocked. You got to go to Pakistan if you want to get to the water. So you'd have to drive it to Pakistan and then get it out on a ship because you can't fly out all those tanks and trucks. They're too heavy. So you got to put them on a boat. So we were doing retrograde at the same time. That also was a target. So shortly after I visited, they decided to blow it up. So that was one of the attacking points. So I'm going to use an example of a skirmish that happens on the border that is frankly, this is something that you also have to understand. Afghanistan and Pakistan are both sovereign countries, right? They're both sovereign countries. Much like the United States, Canada, and Mexico, they're all sovereign countries. NATO, in its mission, is not allowed to get involved in sovereignty issues between two countries, right? That's not NATO's job. NATO's job is not to stop Afghanistan from killing Pakistan and vice versa. Their job is to put the insurgency down. So this is Goshta Gate in the upper right-hand corner. I wish I had a good picture. This is pretty much what all of Goshta looks like, right? And there's a little road, and I'm telling you, it's like a goat path. That's the road. That's one car wide, right? And it goes across this little opening. And the Pacs decided they wanted to put that panel up. They put this panel up. End of the world as we knew it. They just closed the border. Pacs closed the border. What are they doing? Okay, not kidding. You could walk around it. This side and this side. Wouldn't even be hard. You could walk around it in about 5 minutes. But they closed the border because they put the gate up. They covered the gate. There was escalation. Both sides brought stuff up. They went from rear areas, they brought equipment up, they brought tanks up, they increased the number of troops. And the Pacs say the Afghans started it, the Afghans say the Pacs started it, but they started shooting at each other. And they started shooting at each other with tanks. This tank fired like 30 or 40 rounds out of that tank. Luckily, there's only one person killed on the Afghan side. A poor young soldier was in a house when a round hit the corner of one of the houses off the checkpoint, and he was killed. And that notched it up a whole nother level, right? Because now you had a martyr. And the president of Afghanistan declared him a martyr, put him at the highest level of martyrdom in the country that he's allowed to put them at. This is the awful Pacs doing this to us. And troops were going both sides. And we really thought this was going to be a massive problem and a serious border war at this point over this. And diplomats got involved, right? So now you're dealing with embassies. Now you're dealing with ambassadors. Now you're dealing with the general, 4-star generals going over to talk to the president of Afghanistan, trying to talk him off the ledge. Please step back from this. This is not what you want to do. But that's all you're doing is talking, right? Because you can't roll in there. You can't physically separate the two. So a lot of talking, a lot of big issues. The President of the United States is getting briefed on this, right? This was a serious, serious issue. And what it came down to was they finally brokered an agreement to take that panel down. And it went back to the way it was. But now, they're all upset again. They're all on needles with each other. Because they just proved again that those dirty Pacs are going to shoot at us, those dirty Afghans are going to shoot at us, the both sides just hate each other, right? And then, since I left, the Pacs they're digging a trench. They're making a huge trench to try to separate the two in the border, right? So I'm hopeful that this is going to, in the end, be good for the countries. Because it should this wall is very significant, this trench is very significant. This should really limit the number of insurgents that are coming through at the non-checkpoints, right? And hopefully provides a decent buffer for folks to get to the kind of level of skirmishes that we saw when we were there. So they are working to, the Pacs to make it a more normal border, I will call it, a border that we'd be more familiar with seeing. And this was the kind of damage that they did with the tank rounds. And I don't know if anybody's seen these, but these are provided HESCO barriers. It's essentially a metal cage with a burlap bag in it, and you pour rocks in it, right? So you can kind of set them up. They're like big cubes, and you can make walls pretty quick out of them. And that's what, it's mostly dirt and rocks, so it gets hit by a tank round, it crushes people inside. So what did I take away from a year in Afghanistan? It's a 150-year-old problem with this border that nobody's addressing to seriously fix, right? There is so much bad blood between the two, and there's so many incidences of both sides doing wrong that I really don't think, much will change in the next 10 years, right? It's kind of the same. The only thing that could get worse is if our involvement goes down and it kind of goes back into lawlessness and the Taliban's able to take the country over again. That would be bad. That would be worse, right? But I mean, it's kind of the status quo between the two. It's kind of the status quo between Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's just a very unusual place, right? Very unusual to deal with these socioeconomic problems, to deal with the history of the place, Seriously, different calendars, different languages, different time zones, all those things are just so unusual that makes Afghanistan really a unique problem for us.
So, they used to call Afghanistan the place where empires went to die. So the Russians learned that, the
Yes.
Brits learned that before them.
Yes.
The Russians been pretty recent. We stood and watched them get themselves thrown out of there. And we go right back in there and we do the same thing. Well, we don't do the same thing they did. We have different aims, I guess. But it seems to me like it'd be easier to go in there when you need to, clean out the rats, get the heck out of there, and then when the rats come back in, go in there again and clean them out again. You know, we have these huge bombs that blow up whole valleys. Find the training camps when you need to blow them up. They can go away, and go back in a few years. It'd be cheaper than staying there forever, and less lives. There's still guys getting killed there.
That's true. Yep. I mean, even this year, right?
Yeah, and they're getting killed by Afghans in uniform sometimes.
Sometimes that is true. Yeah. So it's a very. I wish it was so easy to
I know
find
it's
them,
not. I know
to
it's
know
not
which
true.
ones are the bad ones, right? And by the way, a good one today could be a bad one tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we even had a program that if you're a bad one today and turn in your gun, you could be a good one tomorrow. You can go the other way.
Probably decided you could.
Correct. So all of those problems are going to exist. We as Americans can't get that through our head, right? For starters, we grow up as Americans. They don't even grow up as Americans. They don't grow up as Afghans, I mean, right? They don't view themselves that way, right? And the value of life there is a lot less too. They don't value life the way we do, okay? I mean, they definitely don't move at our pace. It's just so different that nobody, the Brits, the Russians, or us, and when I say us, it's really all of the NATO folks, all of the UN folks, all the countries, mind powers that can put it together have never solved this, right? And that is because insurgencies are so hard to fight, right? I mean, there's insurgencies in Turkey. There's insurgencies in a lot of countries. And they're very hard to fight. And when the terrain looks like that, and they're scattered across those many little spots, really, really hard to find them, right? You're tracking single people in that area, right? And then with today's technology, we might like today's technology, it makes it a lot harder. We think it makes it easier. It really makes it harder. Most of these rounds are set off by a cell phone.
Yeah.
They go put the round out there in the middle of the night with an activator from a cell phone. They go make a telephone call from miles away and launch it. So you're having a rocket launch where there is nobody. Find that guy, right? Go try to find him who's pushing the button. It's really hard. So I don't think there's any way to nest them all out, right? You won't.
No, you have to keep doing it.
Because keep in mind, when you're doing things like this, right? This little skirmish could have made 3 kids in the village next door be convinced that now this is, I got to get involved, right? So you have that problem too. So it gets very, very good. Yes, sir.
Does the religion have any problem? The Muslims and the different religions as being a part of these groups?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, I mean, how much of it is religion, right? A little. I wouldn't say it is as much as you would think. Ethnicity is probably bigger than of the issue, in my mind, from my experience, than the fact of Muslims versus, Christians or what have you. One nice fact there: the Turks go around on every car with the Turkish flag on it. Americans don't put American flags on their cars. Turks put Turkish flags on every car. So there's absolutely no doubt that they're Muslims. And they don't get attacked. So there's a little bit of the Muslims who are in NATO, they do kind of get a pass from the other folks who are in Afghanistan who are Muslim.
What is our plan? The United States, do they continue to do this for another 20, 30 years? I mean,
I believe, so when I was there, Obama was the president, and he had set a timetable to end combat operations in 2014, and we were marching to that timetable. So we were closing outposts that U.S. Army folks were sitting in, and we were turning them over to the Afghans. Probably the best comparison of what I'll call when I was there to folks in this room was Vietnamization. It was turning the war over to the Vietnamese in the early 70s. It was turning the war over to the Afghans in 2014. Now, I believe Trump's flipped that and said, I'm not putting a timetable. We haven't completed what we want to do in Afghanistan, and I'm not going to put a timetable on them to finish.